Thank you for watching Status's video for the Status HR and Ops Forum that we held in May this year. In this particular video, Sham Moodliar from IQ Business is talking about change management and project management, particularly in the context of implementing preparedness for TES, the new TES legislation, and also for implementing disability employment, which is becoming a much bigger BBBEE expectation for businesses. We hope you enjoy the presentation, and we hope to see you at future forums.
The impact of this is going to be quite big and quite far-reaching, so it makes sense to actually to roll this out using project management, proper project management. Part of the things then we would say to advise to consider in something like this type of legislation, ensure when you go through your project management that you actually take a look at the people, process, metrics, and technology aspects of it, and it can be far-reaching. So, once you implement this and you understand, you've done your measurements, how do you ensure that everyone throughout the organization that has different touch points, that actually all along your processes, that you've also thought about that and how it integrates with what you already have, in your systems where you now need to start capturing data in different ways than you had before, perhaps fields you've never had. So there's so many other areas to think about once you start to get your head around just what the legislation means. Also go ahead and ensure in your project plans that you take the view, at least at these 3, if not 4 pillars, including metrics, of where you focus your attention on your project plans. So you can read all this, it speaks for itself. That alone, good project management, is not enough. As you probably know by now, some of you know the statistic, 70% of change fails. And that statistic, unfortunately, has been so for at least 10 years already, so it hasn't really improved. So the key thing to do is to bear that in mind. So any answers or any ideas over the last 20 years, what has come up research-based as the top reasons why change fails? So let me share with you quickly, before Demo chases me off, the top 4. The top 4 empirically proved, evidence-based, of areas where it fails. 1, sense of urgency. Seems obvious for many people in this room. You understand it. Your challenge, especially in this compliance type work, as we've seen with retailers when we work with POPI compliance, PCI compliance, etc., the sense of urgency is usually at a select few. The reason change fails predominantly is that sense of urgency isn't permeated throughout the organization, not just in the HR function, but in the leadership team, etc. And unless you have the sense of urgency, the change will fail, because people say, it's just another project. Why should I? How will I be personally affected in it? If I'm not affected, why should I care? Why should I facilitate the process? So I cannot stress enough, before you start this, is to really create the sense of urgency of what does it mean, not just with HR organizations, but across the organization. Probably the first biggest one. Second one, guiding coalitions. Quite often, if you manage to get a guiding coalition, and that's across HR, to buy into this and say, yes, we need to do it, quite often it's because there's a big stick. Well, we'll do it because we have to, or it'll cost us money. Go ahead and do it, here's the budget. Big failure point is when they don't stand inside the change but outside the change. You need leadership to actually provide a guiding role, more than making the budget possible or walking the talk, but actually working with each other to create a coalition for the change. We've seen many times one department in an organization is very pro the change, but it needs to be implemented across departments. Those leadership people don't talk, are not aligned, change fails. Next one, setting direction. The old way of doing it is we'll decide what to do and we'll tell you, and by the way, you've got to do it because you have to do it. It doesn't work. If you don't involve people in the way you set that direction, you know where you want to go, involve them in the how, it's part of the understanding. In fact, it might seem that it's pre-project, but it's actually part of the intervention, because they get more deeper sucked into what the change is about. So involve them in the way that you're going to set the direction of how you're going to get there. Key failure point. And lastly, most often this type of change is viewed as a project. So what happens is you do it as a project. Project managements have a beginning and an end, but unless you ensure the execution by anchoring it in the key parts of your business, like in your measurements, in your reward systems, in your leadership behaviors, etc., and you create a right balance between inspiration and discipline for the change, it's also failed. So it pushes back. So you get to a point and then it pushes back again. So I would say if we know that these are the top 4 failure points, then it almost stands to reason if you know this up front, because there's a lot of things you can do, but this is 80% of what will ensure your execution. Focus on these 4. Make sure they have a heavy weighting in your project management of implementing. Once you've worked in all of that, you actually go through the change process. Then, of course, some of you might have quite different ways of you go through the process of how you're going to roll it out. This is just our one, and we try to keep it as simple as possible. Obviously, there's this prepare element where you do, where you position it and you partner. That's all about how you create the sense of urgency, the sense of excitement, your guiding coalitions, etc. When you go into the delivery mode, the types of interventions you do and how you involve it, you need to have separate interventions for that area. And then again, like I said, the reinforcement is how you measure and market it so that you get more buy-in later on. And the big thing, what we're seeing in compliance work, I think somebody mentioned it earlier, how do you shift away from this is what we have to do to, wow, this actually is a benefit to our organization. And especially in this reinforced phase, it's about showing that. When we looked at POPI compliance, people said, oh, well, now we can't use all the information as freely as we want. But we're saying you need to be compliant anyway. But what if you take an information governance point of view and you look at all the information through inside and out of your organization and become better at it? It actually can help you. And so it's about finding that communication for this change as well and creating the change story for it in the reinforced phase as well. So, and then finally, we know that people go through different some of you may have heard of it, or most of you probably know about it. When you go through a change, people tend to go through a kind of curve of being resistant towards the change to hitting a low point and then slowly coming out of it. So what we've said is if we take the knowledge of how you prepare, how you implement, and how you reinforce, then in that curve of people's resistance towards change, tailor your interventions according to that. So some basic ideas that in this first phase, it's all about the positioning of the change. Well, you can read all of this slide because I don't want to go through the whole thing, but there's different phases where you have different initiatives for it.